Welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast, episode number 67. Today, if you're watching the video version, you can already tell we are joined by a special guest. We have Johnny Yap.
Hello.
Johnny, you are a martial artist. I'm actually telling you now what you are.
Okay.
Cool. Shut up and listen, Johnny.
All right. Yes.
Be quiet. Johnny, for those listening, is a martial artist, a BJJ practitioner. He's just starting a budding career in politics, which we may touch on later in the episode. And of course, most significantly, is a podcast host of his very own podcast called Johnny Yaps, very aptly named.
Yep.
And you can find that it is on YouTube and streaming on all platforms that you can find podcasts. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link to direct link to that podcast in the show notes and the description of this episode if you want to check it out. But without further ado, Johnny, welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast.
Thank you. I have to say, Kieren, you make this so much more professional than what I do.
I wouldn't say that.
No, I'm literally just, rock up. I don't have any of the buttons set up on my roadcaster. I literally just hit the button and go, let's just have a conversation, and away we go.
Yeah. So for the audience, I have done, if you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen, I was a guest on Johnny's podcast very recently.
Yep.
I think by the time this airs, it may be on audio, but you'll be able to find it. I'll put a link to that as well in the description on the YouTube version.
Yep.
So I was on Johnny's podcast. He came here. He's got a portable studio. We have very, very similar setups. So we spent like 20 minutes just geeking out on audio equipment. I just looked over to Adam and he's
so glad I wasn't here.
You know the Simpsons when like Homer's like not present and like the monkey's just going in his brain? That is exactly the look on your face that you're like,
I'm still sitting here going, what's a roadcaster?
It's magic.
Yeah.
It records all this audio and we can listen back to it.
Yeah, magic audio equipment.
Quite fortunate that Kieren does all that side of things.
Yeah.
I think I don't know how you feel about, recording your episodes, but when we first started, Kieren and I had a conversation about, okay, well, here are a few different options for microphones and how you can go about it. And because obviously you could, in theory, record a podcast on your phone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But which is great that people can do that, because maybe that's for some people all they have access to. But, we quickly came to the conclusion that, well, man, it's a podcast. The platform is audio.
Yeah. You need to have good
You
quality
need to
audio.
have good audio, right? Like, props to people that they still go and do it if all they have access to is a phone or whatever, But yeah, we tried to get as best quality as was within our range. And fortunately for me, Kieren, with all his videography stuff, he's like, boop, 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 presses the buttons. And
I mean, from one video/audio guy to another, I can say that Johnny's setup is very professional. So very high quality audio in his podcast. Definitely check it out. But Johnny,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, this is the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast.
Yes.
So of course we need to
Talk
go
about
there.
jiu-jitsu.
We need to,
And then we go beyond jiu-jitsu.
exactly. Yes, exactly. So whenever we go off topic, that's why we called it Beyond Jiu Jitsu. So we give ourselves like that grace. We can go off topic.
if you
as much
notice,
as
you
we
can
want.
also abbreviate it Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast to BJJ, right?
Ah,
So-
yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
See, you're operating on many levels.
There's levels to the game, son.
Exactly.
But Johnny, when did your martial arts journey begin? Because I know that your martial arts doesn't just include jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I know that you do a lot of
Yeah.
MMA breakdowns as well. Very, very analytical MMA breakdowns, I must say.
Yep.
So talk us through your martial arts journey when you found jiu-jitsu, and let's start there.
All right. So I actually started my martial arts journey as a kid. Obviously, like parents, they want to find things for their kids to do. I was a bit of a sook when I was a child. And when I say that, right, like, and I see this in my son as well. It's not so much.
How old's your son? Sorry,
So
Johnny?
my son is 3.
3.
Yeah. And so what it is, it's not that you actually, feel like the world is ending. It's just an easy out.
Right.
And so I was the second child. So I'm the youngest in my family. My brother's 7 years older than me. And so my dad would describe my brother as like the latchkey kid. He could just leave him alone and he'd be fine. He'd do whatever he wanted and let him go. Right. But for me, I was very, I wanted, whether it was people around me or things to do, I always wanted to be occupied. I was that kid that the teachers would describe as hyperactive. And I learned at a very early age you could manipulate people just by faking some tears. Right?
Right.
So
I love that you're not even like, oh yeah, I just like cried uncontrollably all the time. It's like, no, I was manipulating people.
yeah, it is. It's emotional manipulation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you get away with it, and you keep getting away with it, it becomes a lever.
It's like learned behavior. Yeah.
So
100%.
what happened was, and why I can reflect on that and realize that was the case, it'd be like, say, let's say I was like wrestling with some mates, right? And then if I ended up, as a kid, like just play fighting or whatever, and if I ended up, not enjoying the game anymore, just fake some tears, and then we just move on to something else.
Yeah.
Right? It's the easy way to get whatever I wanted. If I didn't want to play that game anymore, I don't want to play, and then just move on to the next thing. Right. So as a result of that, my mum decided she would send me to karate at 5 or whatever. To try and learn some discipline and toughen me up. And that was probably the start of, I guess, that is the start of my martial arts journey, right? So I did karate from the age of 5 through to 12.
Did you enjoy it back then?
I did actually. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed karate because, as a kid, I actually really enjoyed action movies, right? Like, so Bloodsport, like all those, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies back in those days. Like I really loved that stuff. The Bruce Lee movies, like Jackie Chan, like I loved all of those that kind of cinema. And so as a result of it, I think most kids, if you're into that sort of stuff, you spend time, punching and kicking in your living room, thinking like, this is how you, thinking this is how you fight, right?
Finding twigs and being like, and karate chopping them in half. And,
So I did karate from 5 till about 12, and I was really into it. And then part of the reason why I stopped karate is because we moved houses. So when I was 10, we moved from St. Clair, which is out west, to Baulkham Hills, which is in the northwest of Sydney. And as a result of that, so where I was training previously in St. Clair, that was like where that dojo was. It was too far to travel.
Yep.
So we tried another one that was like another branch of the same school that was a little bit closer, but just sort of wasn't the same. And so I lost a bit of interest, and then I stopped doing that at the age of 12. And then what happened was in high school, one of my friends, Shane, he'd found some martial arts to go to, and it was Chinese Kung Fu. So as a result of that, like his parents know my parents, and they said, oh, why don't you take Johnny along? And so then I went to that, and I fell in love with it. And part of the reason why I fell in love with it was because it was so difficult. Like it was very complex, and like as a 14-year-old, like I was training with adults, which was great because there's not only a skill difference, there's a strength difference, there's a size difference, and I really enjoyed that. Like I think the challenge was something that I really liked, and I liked hard training. Like I just like to just train really hard, and I think there's also an element of being Kung Fu. You sort of like, for me, from a culture perspective, there was some heritage there. My master was he was from Malaysia originally, but Malaysian Chinese, and that's a very similar background to my parents.
Yeah,
and so that really resonated for me, and
you had that feeling of I was born to do this.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, I got really into Kung Fu, and I did Kung Fu for like almost 21 years of my life.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So lifelong. So basically, when I started at 14, I only stopped a few years ago, and we can talk about that too. But yeah. So I was really into it. So all pretty much the remainder of my high school through uni, and I was like,
sorry to interrupt. All at the same school, or you kind of moved?
All at the same school.
Yeah. Wow.
All at the same school. 21 years at the same school.
Wow, that is awesome. That's so cool.
And like it's a big chunk of my life. And it's funny because, sometimes my wife was like, oh, you were too into it. And it's like, yeah, but like, I think, you gotta fan those flames of obsession, because it's only when you go deep into something, like there's an old quote, I think it's the Miyamoto Musashi quote from the Book of Five Rings, where he talks about, when you understand the way in one thing, you can see it in everything.
You see the way in everything. Yeah.
And so that is one of the things that I was really grateful for. Like, I don't view any of my years there as being wasted from that perspective, because a lot of that learning and a lot of those lenses that you use to view the world, I feel like I can apply those to other things. And so, when I do, my MMA breakdowns and those sorts of things, when I look at the striking elements, I am looking at things from like I'm using concepts that I might have picked up through Kung Fu, or concepts through BJJ, or concepts through wrestling and things like that. And using those different lenses to try and understand, okay, what is going to make this more high percentage, or why is this? Why did that appeal to me? You know, there was obviously something in that sequence that appealed to me, in the way that one person either shut down the other person's game or made an adjustment to then counter somebody else's game.
Right.
So yeah, so did kung fu for 21 odd years of my life. Throughout that, towards the probably the last sort of 10 years of my kung fu career as well, I got exposed through. Probably earlier than that. So I competed in mixed martial arts. So I did pancration competitions, where it was like no strikes to the head, but wrestling, ground, and strikes to the body and kicks and things like that.
Does it have submissions as well?
Submissions.
Submissions.
Is that where you were introduced to training grappling?
Yeah. So basically, yeah, I like, you know, I had so this would have been I think this would have been the early 2000s still. So probably maybe like 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. So UFC was still in its early days, right? And so people still had this idea, and I was one of those guys that had that idea that, you know, styles can combat other styles, right? So you get sort of not to say indoctrinated, but you get brought down this pathway that you think that, hey, if I'm really, really good at this specialization, I can use that specialization to combat anything else. And, you know, getting exposed to mixed martial arts and pancration, you learnt very quickly that, hey, no, it may not be the case. So I tell this story quite a bit on my podcast, but I think it's a really relevant story because my first mixed martial arts fight, I actually won. And I think that actually set back my progression as a martial artist.
Because it kind of validated like the thoughts you already had.
Exactly. Yeah. So winning my first fight was actually the worst thing that could have happened to me, because I reckon that actually set me back, say 5 years. Because I would just, so after that, you know, you win your first fight. I lost my second fight. I didn't lose because I got knocked out or submitted. So I actually submitted the guy in my first fight.
Wow. What was the submission? I must ask.
So it was, I did sort of like a hip wheel throw, so Koshiguruma, and then I had him in like like Kesagatami. So it was just like just basically like a bulldog choke.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I bulldog choked the guy, and I got the submission. But the stand up, you know, like the stand up was fine. All of my fights, the stand up was fine. The stand up was never the issue. But in my second fight, I was going against a guy. I think his name was Jordan, and he was training. So this was down. We're at like Illawarra PCYC or something like that. And yeah, after the initial feeling out process where, you know, he realized, oh, you know, Johnny can strike. So we went to the ground, and then I got stuck on my back for the remaining, 3 minutes of the round or whatever. And, you know, from a mental standpoint, as I said, because I won that first fight, it was like, oh, you know, all I need to do then is just avoid getting to the ground. Like that was how, you know, basic my thought process was back then. And I was so fixated on the idea that, hey, I could use, you know, just what I'm learning to overcome any adversity. It's basically when all you have is the hammer, you see everything as the nail.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was when I first got exposed to the idea of mixed martial arts, and it was actually more through. So I would say there's a couple of guys that really helped me to then open up a little bit more. So one of them is my mate Dexter, who he trains at VT1, so he's a brown belt there. And he started.
That's the guy who runs VT1. Liam.
Yeah, that's Liam Resnikov's gym. Yeah. So Dexter was a mate of mine from uni days, and we would always actually muck around. So when he started training jiu-jitsu, we would muck around and have rolls and things like that. And it was funny because he would say, oh, you know, you roll very differently, because I guess, you know, I was trying to apply, you know, non-traditional BJJ concepts, so concepts from Kung Fu or karate, into my roles in grappling. And so, you know, you see the way you see problems and how you attack problems is different, right? Because that's your background. So, and you see this, I guess a common example would be when you look at different jiu-jitsu schools, because different jiu-jitsu schools, the way the coaches teach and what their game might be a little bit different. You might find that at one place, you know, people love playing closed guard, but at another place, people love playing open guard. Right, it's that style of thing, right? So how I would approach the problem would be, you know, based on what I'm thinking is the solution to that particular problem. And so as Dexter got better and better, it came to a point where I was like, oh, okay, now I'm struggling to hold my own against this guy, and I think that was probably when Dex probably got to his maybe when he was a blue belt or something. There was I think when he was a blue belt. I had my bucks, and part of my bucks, my guys had organized to get all
Jelly wrestling.
it was actually funny what they did. We had like 20 guys rock up to this an MMA gym. And basically get put through the ringer at this MMA gym and actually, you know, have to spar each other and
Wow,
that's fun. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it was awesome. All right?
Like, was this like pre-intoxication or everyone was already
pre-intoxication?
Like, right.
We're responsible.
There's a lot of puke. You know?
Yeah, no, you don't want that post-intoxication. It would have been a disaster, right?
Yeah,
that's such a fun idea.
Yeah, that's an excellent
for
idea.
a bucks. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah. So that was part of what the guys had organized for my bucks. And so I think, it was on that day, like, you know, as I was doing the sort of like the king of the mat, right? And so like being the buck, like you're stuck in the middle and everybody's smashing you, trying to smash you. And majority of the guys there, you know, didn't have any ground training. So I was fine with practically everyone that day. But Dexter caught me in something that day and I was like, that was interesting, right? And so it started to make me really think about, okay, I need to actually put some more emphasis into this if I really want to understand it, and not get caught, right?
And just imagine you were on your wedding day and your wife's like, Johnny, you seem so distracted, and you're just still playing through your mind that submission that Dexter caught.
That fucking armbar.
You got me in a triangle, actually. I still remember it. I remember it in detail. And so so what happened from there was when I started working in Wollongong. So I was general sales manager at a Mercedes-Benz dealership in Wollongong. So that was actually so after I'd gotten married, we went on a honeymoon. We'd come back and I wanted to change jobs anyway. So I ended up working down in Wollongong. And so when I started working in Wollongong, I thought I need to find somewhere to train because, you know, I don't want to get caught in traffic at the moment. At the time, my wife and I, we didn't have kids. So I was looking for a place to train in the morning because my previous strategy was obviously I like to train in the morning, work, and then do my martial arts training in the evening. So at the time, I think what I was doing was I was just going to like Anytime Fitness or something, just trying to find something to do some strength and conditioning. But it was so boring. You know, it was so boring. And so then I found a gym called Full Circle Mixed Martial Arts. And at the time, they were just literally around the corner from my work. And I got in touch with the coach there, Russell Thompson, and said to Russ, I'm looking to do some more groundwork, you know, bolster my wrestling and my grappling to sort of complement, you know, the striking that I've already got. And Russ was really good. He actually, you know, he never tried to force anything down my throat. He just said, okay, yeah, we can do that. So I was doing privates with him and training at the gym there. And that was sort of, you know, where I started to pick up my MMA grappling with Russ there. And so I was in Wollongong for about 5 years. So throughout those 5 years, probably about 3 years in, one of my other friends, so another guy that he actually used to train Kung Fu with me. So Jason Tan is his name. And he'd moved on to training Jiu Jitsu. I think he trains at Gracie Humiata in Castle Hill. And he was doing quite well. Like I think he went to World Masters one year as a purple belt and won his division.
Awesome.
So did really well. And so I would try and catch up with him. It wasn't as frequent as catching up with Dexter, but like, you know, maybe say once every year or something like that. And we try and, you know, do some rolls so I could see, you know, how his progression was. And and he's like rooster weight, so he's only like 50 something kilos, but he was a very different puzzle to solve, right? Because he's, you know, he's a guard player, so he plays from bottom, and very fast on his back at changing angles and things like that. So when I caught up with him, he was like, oh, by the way, I roll actually at a gym that's close to you on Sundays. So with a bunch of guys that are all, you know, around between 50 and 70 kilos. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, he was like, oh, I'll ask the coach there if you can come. And then he said, okay. And so and then Dave said, okay. And so then I went down. So that was Integrated Combat Center where I currently train. And for like probably 2 years, I was rolling with them every Sunday. And it was like, you know, there'd be black belts that go. And like I was like unqualified to roll with these guys. Like at the end of the day, like most of them were competitive guys, whether they were like purple and above competitive guys. And we'd have, you know, visiting black belts and things like that. And I would say I was unqualified because here I was just more of a striker with some grappling experience. But my game was very, very focused just on, you know, it was tricks. I would say it's more tricks, right? Like, so chase the sub, look for the sub. And so my game was very fast and focused on obviously, you know, trying to catch a leg or trying to do those things. Because I would say I learned jiu-jitsu I learned it, you know, going for leg locks first. And then only through my time at ICC, I've had to develop my top game and the upper half of the body.
And even at that point when you were rocking up on the Sundays, what was the culture like at the gym? Because something Kieren and I have spoken a lot about on, you know, multiple episodes, or even just my philosophy in the gym with my students is, you know, some gyms, and I would call it outdated as a whole nowadays, but of course some gyms probably still follow it, that whole, well, you just beat the shit out of the new guy and it's like sink or swim, survival of the fittest. Yep. What was the culture like at that point in time when, you know, the reason I'm mentioning this or asking this is because you said, oh, I wasn't qualified to roll with these guys, but was it, I mean, were these guys looking after you and rolling with you how you would roll with a less, you know, if they're competitive black belts and you're a less experienced beginner, not beginner in mixed martial arts or in combat sports, but a beginner in jiu-jitsu, did they look after you or did they kind of smash you and you being tough because you fought MMA just sucked it up and, you know?
Look, the sink or swim thing I think is a very interesting mentality, right? Like I think that really actually comes down to so if you're the person that's visiting the gym, I think it's actually more on you than it is on the place that to accommodate you. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, you're the guest, right? It'd be like if I walked into Kieren's place and I thought, you know, oh, well, I own this place. I walk over to his fridge and open his fridge and grab his drinks and start.
Yeah, like if you walk in and he tells you to take your shoes off, you're like, oh, well, it's your house. I take my shoes off.
That's right. Right. So as the guest, when you go and visit other gyms, you need to approach the gym with that respect to understand what is actually the mentality of this gym, right? Because if that gym is a sink or swim place, then if you as the visitor don't try and match, when I say match, I don't mean you're not trying to kill them, but you need to match that sort of intensity, because otherwise it's disrespectful. And the reason why I say that is because where I train kickboxing, we have that mentality, right? So if people come in and they've trained before, I'm actually there to show you respect. And if I'm playing around with you and just sort of just touching you,
disrespectful.
It's actually disrespectful because that's basically saying whatever you've learnt for however long you've learnt it, I don't see you as worthy, so I'm only just going to play with you.
Yeah, I'm going to fuck
with you. That's such a good point, because I say that to my students, and I'm sure you've experienced this. And even though you have that mentality, I would find it hard to think you haven't been guilty of it at least once, where you roll with a higher belt and you kind of show that default respect, and you almost like don't roll with them properly, you know, because you don't want to mess with the status quo or whatever. But I say to my students, I'm like, man, like fucking bring it. Like just roll with me normally. And, you know, if you pass me or if you tap me or whatever, of course the competitor in me is going to be like, let's go. But like the instructor in me is going to be happy. Like it means you're getting better. And if you as a white belt or a blue belt aren't rolling with me properly like you would with another blue belt, then it's kind of disrespectful. What do you think? I can't handle you rolling properly with me, and maybe I can't. Like I said, if you do pass me or sub me, that's awesome. Power to you, right?
You don't want this heat, you don't want
this. I remember I mentioned this. I don't know what it was, whether it was before lockdown or after the most recent lockdown, whenever it was. But I mentioned this like on a podcast, and it was the first time I think Kieren had heard it like really splayed out like that.
Yeah.
And then the next role we had, whether it was that day or
it was that day, later that day.
Right, he came at me so hard.
That's
like
good.
Kieren came so hard, and I was like,
I never roll with you normally. I was just thinking when you were talking, like I don't roll with you how I would another blue belt. I roll with you to try and murder you, bro. I fucking roll with you so hard. Like I roll with you like you. And it's the world fucking title of the line, son.
Yeah, and like I had. You know, Beck, she's a blue belt from Jungle Brothers, and she's been visiting every now and again. And she came and trained last week, and I rolled with her. And I said to her afterwards, I was like, Beck, like roll with me properly. Like you don't have to play around with me. Yeah. Like just like, you know, and I didn't say to her like, you're disrespecting me, but I was like, just
it's context, like, right? Like so why I would say that is because one of the traps that you can fall into when you've been at a gym for a long time, when people start to know your game and you sort of fall into this trap of because you guys know each other's games and it's semi, you're friends with these people as well. So sometimes people fall into this mindset of, oh, well, this person's always been better than me. So
Yeah.
you sort of just, and that's not the actual mentality that you're supposed to have. If you want to train any fighting art, your responsibility is essentially to make sure that you keep people's bullshit to a minimum, right? If it's a bullshit move and it doesn't work, it shouldn't work, right? But if you get caught with the bullshit move, that's on you, right? But you don't and that's why I say context is important. If we're live rolling and we're sparring, right? Then that should be the means to sort of, you're trying to match each other's level, right? But if we're drilling, I'm not going to go and be a dick in drilling and then just suddenly rip out a different move because
caught you, bitch.
Right? Sucks to be you, right?
That's funny.
Just for the sake of my own ego, right? So there's that balance.
And then the next day you see on Instagram, Kieren's like, fucking sub Johnny Yap. Motherfucker, we were doing hip escapes in the warm up.
That's right. Like there's no benefit to that, right? So I think in your training, and so I part of that I think actually because I did so much sparring before I actually then focused on any fundamentals. I think that actually helped me for my style anyway. It allowed me to really think about things. So I wouldn't be thinking about things on a technical level. I would be thinking about things on a conceptual level. So as an example, if I continually got passed into this position, I'd be thinking about it from, okay, well, forget about the technique, because to me, if I can understand the concept of how they're getting to that position, then I can start to work back on how do I now address that. So that was my approach to how I would try and build my grappling skills at that point in time. And then, it was probably after a couple of years, Dave, the coach there, Dave, he said to me, Johnny, you're here every week. Like, you might as well just come and, train at the gym properly. And then, for all the time that you spend here, at least you have the rank to go with it.
Yeah. That's true, right? So you were done probably how long had you been doing these weekly sessions before he was like, bro, so, and by the way, were these sessions, because you weren't, for lack of a better term, you weren't training jiu-jitsu in little air quotes, as in you hadn't joined up and you weren't going through all the systematic, parts of the sport. Were you just doing this no-gi, like those Sunday sessions with no-gi?
So it was basically a lot of no-gi. We were just rolling no-gi every weekend, 10 to 20 hard rolls, 5-minute rounds, just going.
And then how long were you doing that before Dave said time to actually train?
Yeah, probably a couple of years.
No way.
Well, he might have said it earlier, but I would.
You were like, "Fuck you, Dave. I'm good."
No, it wasn't. Okay, maybe it was.
Fuck off, Dave.
Let me think. Maybe it was after a year. Maybe it was after a year. It could have been after a year, but
And then he put you in a gi and he tied your belt on and it already had some stripes on it, and you're like, "Thanks, Dave."
Nah. So that's one of the things I'll say about Dave is that there is no. It was demoralizing for a lot of people when I was a white belt.
Yeah.
Right?
Because you were coming from a position of experience.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like in the US, you get it a lot in like North America, the whole white belt, but you're a Division I wrestler.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You made the Olympic team.
Yeah. So they're like, and I'd see it in the roles, like, if we had, like when people didn't know who I was, and then it's like, okay, like as soon as you sort of get into it, you realize, oh shit, I need to actually match this guy.
Yeah, this guy isn't Brent.
Yeah. And so it was
looking around. Where's the hidden cameras? This is bullshit.
Yeah. It's one of those clickbaity, like black belt wears a white belt.
Undercover black belt.
So it was demoralizing for a lot of people when I was a white belt, and I'd have to actually say to them after the role, hey, look, I've actually been training for a while. I just don't train I haven't trained in the gi. So, like I've got to respect the system and however Dave wants to promote me, that's up to him, right? Like he's the coach. For me personally, I'm at this point in my martial arts journey where I don't really care about belts that much. Like I care more about, how technical am I? If I get beat, I want to try and understand what are the technical reasons why I got beat, so that I can work on those things. I don't really care so much about whatever belt, because at the end of the day, when you roll with someone, you don't go and say, oh, I should beat you because you're a white belt. If that person is a Division 1 wrestler, or he's done judo, or he's done something else, or a different grappling art, you might have a hard time. It's styles, right? It's
and for anyone that
styles.
thinks that they should, say a blue belt, they should beat all white belts, I'd like to introduce them to a guy at our gym called Eric.
Yeah, fuck Eric, bro.
Eric is like this specimen of a human.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a martial arts background, so jiu-jitsu is his first martial art, but he is like an ex-professional athlete.
Yep.
And it just goes to show exactly what you're talking about. You don't know who you're rolling with.
Yep.
Like, they could be an absolute specimen. They could just be a natural jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
And just be a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, we got another guy like that. We've got a guy, Tom Slingsby is his name. Very famous in the sailing community. He won gold at the Olympics for Australia.
Wow.
He's now the skipper of the Australian team in Sail GP, which would be the Formula One of sailing races. And he's a blue belt. And just the fact that he's an Olympic athlete, sailing obviously with the amount of like grips and ropes, and they use a thing called a grinder and all this, he's very strong, and he has, even all that stuff aside, just the mentality that comes with him being a professional athlete in a completely unrelated sport. Every time you roll with Tom, it's like rolling with Eric. You ignore all their physical attributes, just the mentality they have. It's like, oh god, it's always hard work.
So that's the benefit of when you've trained, like done something that's required some, whether it's physical or mental coordination before. This is where I think a lot of people come unstuck. They don't realize how much of their actual things that they do outside in their life, like whatever they've been good at before, if they applied some of their learnings from that into, if they wanted to apply it to jiu-jitsu as an example, or if a jiu-jitsu practitioner was to apply some of that understanding of distance and timing into striking, you could actually very quickly make big gains in any martial art, right? And that was one of the things that I think I appreciated about all my time in these other martial arts, is that I could apply concepts of distance and timing and things like that into my grappling.
There's something to be said about lifelong pursuit in martial arts as a whole.
Yep.
And then when you undertake a newer martial art, there's so much crossover. Like,
it's compound interest.
Oh yeah,
100%. Sometimes I'll have brand new students. They're doing an introductory class or whatever, and I'll ask, "Oh, have you done anything similar before or something?" And they'll say, "Oh, I did Taekwondo, but I've never done any grappling." And I'll say to them, I'll be like, "Oh, cool, you'll be surprised how much that's going to help you." The way you phrased it, anything that requires that sort of mental coordination, it can take you a long way to have those really big gains in the early days. The amount of people who have no coordination, and you try to teach them a hip escape, and you're just like, no, like that leg, don't move that leg. It's like, man, it's been 2 months. You're still moving that leg, right? Whereas you get someone who might have done Taekwondo or like salsa dancing, even, something that, and you're just like, okay, cool. You've got that straight away. Not many people do a hip escape correct their first repetition ever. Right.
So nowadays, I have to ask, when it comes to gi versus no gi, do you split your training between the two? Or are you more orientated toward gi now? Or
so at our gym, so Mondays and Wednesdays are gi days. Fridays and Sundays are no gi.
Right, so
it's
it's pretty evenly split.
It's fairly evenly split.
What do you prefer to train?
So I even when I roll in the gi, unless we're doing gi specific stuff, like, so as an example, if we're doing Toriando passing and we're using the grips and things like that, generally when I'm rolling, I will try and even in the gi, I try and roll in a style that will translate between gi and no gi. That's just my preference. And I guess the reason why I have that preference is because I generally always try and lean my training towards mixed martial arts. So
that makes sense.
And that's just because I actually, my passion, I love martial arts. Like, that's, to me, when you can string it all together, the combinations of things that you can come up with is amazing. And that's what I really love. Like, I love training. So as an example, a move that I like, a sequence that I really love trying to set up is, like being in southpaw, feinting the lead jab, but then going, so the first part of the setup is feinting the lead jab. The second part of the setup is then feigning the lead jab into a left overhand, right? And so then when people see the overhand, then they've got two options, because they're either going to back out or they're going to come forward. And if they come forward, they're going to get clipped by the overhand. If they back out, then I move into an Imanari.
Right.
So I like playing with those things where you have this freedom of expression, where you can go, what can you create? And that's the part that's why I love mixed martial arts.
Do you still train striking?
Yep.
You still train MMA?
Yeah, I'm still doing MMA training as well.
Yeah, nice.
Do you find, now that you've been doing it for long enough, is it quite autonomous for you to, similar to speaking, if you're someone who speaks another language or multiple languages, you get to a certain point, you can kind of just switch on that language in your brain.
Yep.
Do you find it quite easy now, like when you're doing jiu-jitsu, to not have the thoughts of like, oh, but in MMA, I would punch you here or kick you here, because you know that you're training jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Did you go through that in the beginning? Because you get a lot of people who who would come from striking, they learn jiu-jitsu and they say something like, oh, but I could just punch you here. And you're like, yeah, but not in this sport, you can't. The same way that in a boxing match, I can't take you down.
Yeah.
Like, it's within this sport. It's like saying, like, it's no different than having a match of tennis and being like, yeah, but bro, I'm just going to jump over the net and hit you with my racket. No, you're not. You're not allowed to.
So I always viewed it as, so I think the mentality I would approach it with is and I think Georges St. Pierre would talk about this, right? He trained all these styles as specialist disciplines, right? But then it's up to him to put it together, right? So, as an example, when he was doing his jiu-jitsu and things like that with John Danaher, I'm sure they were focusing on MMA oriented grappling, but he's still doing a specialization. He's still rolling with guys who are jiu-jitsu practitioners as opposed to MMA practitioners.
Yeah.
So there's no benefit other than serving your own ego to go and say, oh yeah, you're in bottom half, I can punch you in the face here. You're losing the whole point of the exercise, is that, but can you pass, right? Can you get yourself out of there? Right? Or is this guy in bottom half, he's going to cop a few punches, but then he's on top of you.
It's kind of like what you were talking about at the beginning, how early days when you did your first 2 MMA matches and you got in that mentality of like, I'm going to take my specialty and apply it to all situations.
Yeah.
Whereas you're saying if you're specifically training a different situation, you can, take what's good about whatever other specializations you have, but you're defeating the point.
Yeah.
You're able to use those lenses, like you said, look through the different lens to, it's very, it's similar to, you can always draw parallels with a lot of different sports or professions or whatever, but it's kind of like cooking. If you wanted to, make some, Thai, French fusion food, like you wouldn't have the skill set to bring those two things together unless you put some time in just learning French cuisine and learning Thai cuisine.
Exactly.
Like you can't just be, you're not going to be.
Is this an analogy?
It may be an analogy. You're not just going to be like, imagine apprenticing under some like world-renowned French chef and saying like, yeah, but I'm just going to like put some fucking lemongrass here, bro. And you're like, no, you're not.
But that's where, so like if you think about cuisine from that perspective, right? If you specialize in the individual cuisines, the person that knows 2 styles of cuisine can then create these fusion foods, right? Like, so that's why we have like this huge thing about whether it's, Chinese, Australian fusion or, like where they blend different flavors and different cooking techniques together. It's the same thing for mixed martial arts, but you need to have the respect for the art individually, right?
I'm going to make a sweet and sour pork pie. There we go.
That actually be.
There we go. It'd be so gross, but
I'll try it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'm my first 2 customers. Step 1, learn how to make sweet and sour pork.
Step 2, learn how to make a pie.
What is pie? Oh man.
Yeah, but exactly that, right? You have to. I like the way you put it. It's or you said you use GSP as the example, that it's up to him to put it all together.
Yep.
Right. Obviously, he had help from like MMA coaches as well, but
they can't fight that fight for him in the cage.
Exactly. He's the athlete that has to put it all together.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So Johnny, with all of these different interests around like mixed martial arts, around jiu-jitsu, grappling, all these different endeavors that you've got going on, how often are you training at the moment? What's your training schedule look like for Johnny App?
Yeah, so I train striking 4 days a week, so kickboxing 4 days a week, Monday to Wednesday and Friday, jiu-jitsu Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and some Sundays I'm rolling, some Sundays I'm sparring MMA. So
wow, so at least 8 training sessions per week.
Yeah, so that's what I've negotiated with my wife at this point in time.
I was about to say, how long since you've seen your son?
Wait, what?
So it makes it challenging, right? But I think, life is about priorities, right? You got to work out what are those priorities that are important to you.
That son just isn't one yet.
No.
Not until he's big enough to be a training partner.
Yeah.
You know, until I can drill with him, he can fuck off.
So, but yeah, like I'm in a fortunate place at the moment where, you know, I don't have the pressure of having full-time work. So,
I was going to ask if you were still
Yeah.
because last you said you had moved to Wollongong and you're working at Mercedes. That's a
I'm
long
not
time
doing
ago.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, I was in the automotive industry for 17 years, and it was only until probably November last year that I stopped working in the automotive industry. It's a bit of a long story, but do you want to go through it? Or
Yeah, if you
Okay.
want to share that for sure.
Yeah, so essentially what happened was, you know, my company, the board of directors decided that they wanted to mandate
You know what?
You know what?
it's
And,
like we're on Harry Potter here.
yeah.
It's like the vaccine that must not be named.
and I said at the time, look, you know, I don't think that we should be doing that. Like, I think as a company, you know, unless it's been mandated for our industry, we shouldn't be going over and above what is the mandated requirements from the government.
As in your stance was like, why don't we just do what the government and the health professionals, you know, in
look, at the end of the day, it's a person's choice, right? So I don't think that we needed to add any extra pressure to someone to go and say, hey, if you don't do this, you may not have a job, right?
Right.
And so, you know, after some discussions back and forth, essentially, I don't think they appreciated my position on it. And so that it cost me my job. They made me redundant. So as a result of that, you know, in the initial stages, I was obviously, you know, very angry. And I was telling this story to Kieren on my podcast that I actually had to say to them, you know, when they called the meeting and they didn't entertain any discussion about what we were talking about previously and just said, oh, you know, we've restructured the company, we're making you redundant. I just said, look, hey, you know, let's just hang the phone up right now because I don't want to say anything that is, you know, I'm never going to be able to take back, and let me go and process things and I'll come back to you in a week and we'll talk about it then. So then I went away and obviously did a lot of thinking about things and you know, how did we get to this place in this world, right? Like, you know, I really had to take a step back and look at it from a bigger picture because I didn't want to just be angry just because, you know, it had impacted me personally. I wanted to look at it from the perspective of, okay, if I put myself in the shoes of the board of directors, how much pressure must you be feeling from somewhere to have to go and make that decision?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%.
So that, you know, not only are you going to let go the most senior guy in your BMW business, you're also going to now let go of all these other employees who, for whatever reason,
have the same stance.
have decided that they don't want it or they didn't want to be forced into having it, right? So that's what I guess, you know, got me down this political pathway because I started to look into, you know, every major political party and wanting to understand, you know, what was everybody's different positions on it. And I also wanted to understand, you know, am I wrong in thinking this way? Right? That we should be able to, you know, like the question for me was not whether you should get it or not. The question for me is, should we be able to mandate things like that? Right? Because I would have thought, you know, and part of the reason, you know, I've been fortunate to have such success in my career was because of freedom, right? That my parents came here, you know, from another country as migrants and could build a life here because there was freedom and opportunity to do so. Right. And so they were the things that really stood out for me. Like when I thought about, you know, what are Australian values? You know, Australian values, I would have thought, you know, freedom would have been one of those values. But it doesn't seem that way, you know, when you look at, I guess, you know, what the parties have done, like, you know, where it's the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, like they've all taken very similar stances and they've done the same things. And I don't want to make this too political, but that's what started the journey for me in terms of looking into politics. And then I thought, you know what, I'll just I'll sign up as a member, and I signed up as a member of the United Australia Party. And then they were calling for candidates, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try. I'll put my hand up because at the end of the day, if nobody puts their hand up, then you're left with the dregs of society that do this. And you know, and then when I was shocked when I got a phone call saying that they wanted me on the Senate team, and so you know I'm running in the next federal election, so. you know, aside from campaigning, all I do is martial arts now. So
Yeah, right.
what a
It's awesome.
life.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Johnny's like, oh, so was there stiff competition? And the guys are there like, you know, when you go do a competition and there's like no one else in your division and then you do an Instagram post being like, got silver.
Yeah.
And there's two people in your
You had
division.
one match that you lost.
Yeah, you see the podium, it's just deserted.
Yeah. Well, I love
You're still valid.
I really like the photos when people like, obviously they didn't get the opportunity or whatever happened, but you'll see someone maybe got silver.
Yep.
And but they're then taking their photo on the podium later. So it's actually just them on the podium. I'm
Yeah.
like, bro, you're the only one there and you still got second. How much do you
How
suck?
fucking bad are you?
That's cold.
And so you've got how long of campaigning? When's the election?
Well, election hasn't been called yet, but we anticipate the date should be either May 14th or the 21st.
Right.
So-
So you got a busy few months ahead of you.
Yeah, look, it's an experience, right? Like, so when I talked about, should I do this, with my wife, what we came to is like, what I'm going to learn out of this, when else can you say in your life that you've run in a federal election, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So for me, I wouldn't say that I'm like, focused on winning. That's not my goal of this. It's more the fact that, I stood up for what I believed in, and whatever happens, I'm fine with, because as much as you can try and make the pros and cons lists of why it would be good to do it and why it would not be good to do it. Like, it's not to say that everything's positive, right? Like, do I really want to be involved with politics? I would say no. But I feel strongly enough about, specific issues. And so, mandating things is one thing. Obviously, as a gym owner, lots of gyms have been impacted by what has happened, So, and that was the thing that's one of the things that I really don't like, is that your freedom is not a privilege that people can dole back to you as they see fit. You're born as a human being, you were born with this ability to make choices, right? So there shouldn't be somebody that can go and take away those choices. Like, and the common thing that people will say then, oh, but what about road rules? And I think there's a difference.
I think that's straw manning the argument a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a difference between infrastructure and doing things that we all agreeing that these are good things for society versus, going and saying, well, you need to go and do this, right? And you need to go and do that, because if you allow that for one thing, then you're opening the doorway for concept creep and for those things to then get applied on a larger scale. So, do I agree that we should have had lockdowns? Look, I would say in the initial instance when nobody knew what, was going on, maybe a fair call, right? And I think everybody would have been reasonable enough to say, yeah, if we needed to stop for 2 weeks, we can stop for 2 weeks to better understand what the situation is. But, when it starts to go on for months, and, for a lot of people where, Jiu Jitsu would have been their health and fitness, and now you can't get your kick of health and fitness. So what are we encouraging? We're encouraging people to be unhealthy. And so then they've got an even a worse chance of getting sick, whether it's, and not even necessarily through that virus, but through anything, all-cause mortality. Think about cancers and all these other things, that obesity, all these other issues that you create when you don't allow people to exercise.
I was not going to mention who was involved, but a while back I was on a Zoom phone call with myself, so some people in Sydney, some people in Melbourne, and some people up in Byron Bay. And Byron had at that time just gone into like a 1 week snap lockdown, and the person in Byron was complaining about their 1 week snap lockdown. And I'm like, you're talking to people in Sydney and Melbourne, right? Who had this for fucking months.
Yeah.
The most lockdown city in the world.
Piss
or
off,
whatever.
Yeah.
So go lockdown. Shut up.
Yeah.
So so that's a exciting few months ahead. As long as your priorities don't change. And Dave's like, Johnny, there's a grading coming up, and you're like, I'm pulling out of the running race. My priorities have changed.
My mentality on all that is actually, I feel like it's consistency over intensity. So from that perspective, if you really want to apply the concept of compound interest, the fact is that if you show up and make sure that you're there mentally when you're training, whatever happens from that perspective, with your grades and things like that, like that's all going to happen. That will come. It may take somebody, like a BJ Penn, like 3 years. It might take most of us, 10 to 15 years, right? But it will happen provided you keep showing up. So I don't really have that mentality where it's like, when suddenly there's a goal, I go and try and make drastic changes. I actually,
because the coach knows, right? When you're someone who never trains and
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's a grading and you're there every day for the 2 weeks before the grading.
yeah.
I see you, bro.
Yeah.
I see you.
So I have that mentality where if Dave said, you need to grade tomorrow, or my kickboxing coach said, hey, you're fighting this week, right? I'd fight. Like it just wouldn't phase me, or if my MMA coach said, Johnny, we got you on this card. Like it is what it is. I'm
Note to self, if we ever need a last minute opponent, Johnny will step up, bro.
Yeah.
Just give you a call. Johnny, you're fighting.
Yeah, like it doesn't.
When? 45 minutes.
Oh, shit. Yeah, but like it doesn't really phase me. If you're training consistently, you're always ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
That's awesome approach.
I'll give you a funny anecdote to that, right? Like so, eating before training, right? So what's everybody's? What would you guys say on that? Would you want to train on a full stomach?
No.
Okay.
No.
So when I was training kung fu, basically the story is something like my master would be like, so if you can't eat before you train, if we go out and have dinner and then there's a fight, what are you going to do? You're going to say, "Oh, sorry, mate."
Yeah.
I'm on a full stomach, right?
Yeah.
So and to me it makes sense. It's like you should always be ready. So I got used to training on a full stomach. I can train on a full stomach. I can train on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
Like those things don't bother me anymore. Like I don't think of those things as a big issue. I think we far too often, we as individuals, we take these little things and put them so out of context that we go, to get this right, we need to do all these little things. Like, when we talk about nutrition, we talked about this on my podcast about, if you just look at the big macros, you'll generally go in the right direction. You don't need to necessarily go into the detail and say, "Oh, you need to eat this mushroom," and
calculate all your micronutrients.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a little bit lower on vitamin A today. Like,
right?
Yeah.
Like the more things that you involve in it, the more excuses you give yourself as well. Because having a full stomach and then go, "Oh, I'm not going to go hard today," right? Or I didn't eat. I can't train hard today, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Wait a second. I'm starting to think this whole "you can't swim until 30 minutes after eating" is a lie.
Yeah, straight up. That's complete bullshit.
But it makes me think of like, in engineering, they, how they'll say something along the lines of, they'll try to simplify whatever it is, like a jet engine or something, because the more like points there are, or the more components, the more points of failure there is, the more potential points of failure.
Exactly.
And I remember thinking that when I'm actually still not a huge fan of flying, but nowadays even some of the bigger jets, well, some of the massive ones like the A380 will still have like the 4 jet engines, but even like the big Dreamliners and stuff, they've just got the 2 jet engines, right? And I remember thinking when I was a bit younger, I'd be like, the planes with 4 engines would be like much safer, because then if you lose one, you've still got like 3 engines. But then it's like, no, it's actually
they require all of them.
Yeah. But it's actually kind of the opposite, right? It's like, no, there's actually more points of failure there.
Yeah,
and the planes with 2 engines can fly just fine with one, right? But I know it's slightly off topic, but I got there somehow.
That was a great analogy. Analogy Adam strikes again. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for coming on the episode. I think we could go for another like 2 hours. So
I
think we'll have to get you on again in the future.
Sure.
Particularly around, maybe not around that election time, because it would probably be very busy for you, but maybe in the aftermath we could talk about your experience and
sure.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
There's definitely things that we didn't get to touch on.
Especially if you win, and we can do some whole like how you choked the opposition into submission. Yeah.
Whoa. This isn't Russia, bro. Settle down over there, Ads. You're definitely never running for anything. We're not letting you out of the cage.
I haven't run in years.
Actually, that's a lie. Last time you ran was with me. And yeah, I can testify that.
Yeah, I'm not the fastest runner.
No.
I'm a slow burn, bro.
Yeah. That's very slow burn. And you don't burn for very long. Slow and short burn.
Next time you get him in bottom, you just got to crush the abs.
Yeah. Kieren's saying it.
Kieran tap from a knee right.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So, Johnny, where can people find you? What's coming up? I mean, obviously the election is going to be a big part of your life. But is there anything coming up in the works, more sort of jiu-jitsu / MMA focused? Have you?
No, look, people can find me at Johnny Yaps on Instagram. So it's just JOHNNYYAPS. when I decided on the name for my podcast, it was quite interesting. Like
that's such a good name.
It's just
perfect.
So well,
it's so perfect.
Johnny Yap as Johnny Yaps.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
great. It's great.
So that's where you can find me. Feel free to hit me up there. But it's either there or YouTube or
and your
Apple
podcast is across
Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's on all the platforms. So I'm about to actually start booking my next round of podcasts. So there'll be more content coming up. I don't. Do you have the same problem with Libsyn and the upload limits and things like that?
We have a pretty large upload limit,
Okay.
so we had it. It's just enough. So fill the context just quickly for those listening. In a lot of podcast platforms, they limit how much data you can upload per month. It's their business model.
Yep.
So we have just enough to get our month worth before it resets.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so I guess if you want to see all of my latest content, best to go on YouTube. But if you don't mind catching up at a later date, or you don't only want to listen to audio, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So
yeah, and I'll put a link to everything that Johnny mentioned, and everywhere where you can find the Johnny Yaps podcast in the description. So please check it out and show Johnny some love.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for listening. And until
you,
next
Johnny.
time, see ya.